So tell me, what was it like being in Star Trek and playing Spock?
It was a privilege, it was an honor, and it was a responsibility to Leonard Nimoy, who cast me.
From the heart of Hollywood, it's the Patrick Labyorteaux with Patrick Labyorteaux.
It's the Patrick Labyorteaux, Patrick Labyorteaux. He's the one you gotta know.
Tonight's episode, Stephen Manley.
Patrick Labyorteaux, he's the one you gotta know.
Okay, this is going to be a really good episode because this episode deals with my audition room twin, the boy that I grew up with, a guy by the name of Stephen Manley. Welcome, Stephen.
Hi, Patrick. It's such a pleasure to be on your show. I'm so proud of you. And I tell you, I was watching the show with you and Ike Eisenman the other night, and it brought up, it brought up things going back 50 years ago. It was a pleasure to watch Ike speak, and you just be right along with him. And there were names that were mentioned during the show that I hadn't thought about in a long time, but they brought up wonderful feelings.
Act 1, Beginnings. Let me give a little bit of a ground setting or a table setting here so everybody knows. So Stephen and I are roughly the same age, and we auditioned back in the day. When you would audition, you would go into a room and there'd be people that looked pretty much like you. Nowadays, it can be, everybody's auditioning for everything. But back when we were kids, you would walk in and there'd be dark-haired, blue-eyed kids, lining the walls waiting to read. And Stephen and I obviously we look exactly like now. I've got dark brown hair. He's got dark brown hair. He has blue eyes. I have blue eyes. We look exactly the same now. And we looked even more similar when we were little kids. So we were always auditioning.
Yes.
So what happens when you audition as a little kid is you wait in a room forever and you don't have anything to do. You've already learned your dialogue. You've already done this. And so you end up talking to the other kids. And so Stephen and I got along, and then my mom and his mom got along.
Right.
And then I remember on a couple of interviews, we would just finish the interview, leave. And I think you and I went with our moms. I remember our moms took us, but we went to the Cinerama Dome and we saw like a Pink Panther movie together. Yeah. Or we would hang out and go to get something to eat because moms would want to hang out. And so we would hang out. Right. So Stephen and I have known each other since we were little kids.
1972.
72. Oh, 72. My God.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God, we were just zygotes. And so we even ended up working together on Little House, which we'll get to a little bit later. Okay, so Stephen, welcome. And please, let's start from the very beginning. I know how I got started. I know how I found myself in these rooms. Right. Where did it come from? How did you start acting?
Okay, all right. My mother's father, and we shared that. We're both adopted, right? So Stella's dad was from Italy. And when he was about 15 years old, he moved with his brothers, an older brother and a middle brother. He was the youngest of three. They moved from Naples, Italy. They ended up in New York. And he worked in a shoe shop for a while, I believe it was a shoe factory. They made boots and shoes, one of those sweat shops from the turn of the century. He was born in 1899, so we're talking 1915, right? And when the war broke out, the First World War, he enlisted as a doughboy because he wanted to get his American citizenship. So they shipped him over to France. He was there about 2 months, and then the war ended. And,
wow.
He fought, he saw action. I've got all of his medals. But he was so proud to be an American citizen coming back to New York in uniform. That was a major accomplishment for him. He was very proud of that. He spoke 3 languages. He spoke Spanish. He spoke Italian because in Naples, it was a Spanish port for a long time, so there was a lot of Spanish. He spoke English, and he also spoke a little bit of French. And he didn't want to go back to the shoe factory. He joined a circus. And he worked as an Italian clown in the circus. One of his jobs was cleaning the lion cages on the circus train. which he slept above the cages on the train.
So, like Indiana Jones, he was literally on a train with the tigers
Right,
and the
right,
lions.
right. So it's 1919, I believe, and he gets to Los Angeles. And he gets off the train, and D.W. Griffith wants Italian speaking actors to portray Roman soldiers in the movie Intolerance.
Oh my God.
So he shows up and he can speak Italian, and I've got his costume photographed. It's a hand tinted black and white photograph of him in a Roman outfit from Intolerance. So he did that. He loved it. He thought, I love this business. It's a lot better than the shoe shop, and it's a lot better than sleeping on top of the lions' cages. And he did bit parts and character bits all the way until 1965. He was one of the
Whoa.
first 300 members of the Screen Actors Guild when it was formed in the 1930s. He did one reelers, two reelers. I've got pictures of him with Charlie Chaplin in Echo Park. He did a lot of work. He loved it. When talkies came in, you start to see him in a lot more things. We were watching Frankenstein, and there's Grandpa Soldi as one of the students in the beginning of Frankenstein, right? He worked with the Marx Brothers in the famous movie Night at the Opera. There's a scene where they all crowd into a stateroom and nobody
Uh-huh.
can move anymore. He's one of the people in that scene. So you see
Oh
him.
my gosh.
Right?
That's a classic scene. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. You see him in the publicity photos for that. He used to have tea once in a while with Boris Karloff. They were good friends. He tried to get my mom to be the Maria in Frankenstein, and they
Oh
wanted her.
wow.
They wanted her. They liked her a lot, but when they brought her over to see Karloff and they had his makeup on him because he was shooting other scenes, she was so terrified she wouldn't go near him, and they got the other
So she
little
reacted properly, but
kid.
just too much for the actual to shoot as the little girl.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And, he loved the business. He loved the art and the craft, but he knew, my God, he knew Buster Keaton. He knew Stan Laurel. He knew a lot of people. He did bit parts. He did character bits. He did his own makeup, and he lived with us. I
Oh,
was
okay.
very, very small. If you can look at Cinema Paradiso and see the
Yeah.
little boy with Alfredo when he's inside the projection booth, that's my
Yeah.
relationship with Grandpa Soldi. Okay.
Ah, it's
When,
beautiful.
when his wife passed away in 1969, I was with him constantly. And as a matter of fact, when Sam and Stella brought me home, the first thing he did was say, he comes with me, and so he took a hold of me. And he was the strongest role model in my life, the greatest influential figure for me. So here I am, a little boy. I'm 3 and 4 years old, and I'm watching him crack open his makeup kit, which was from the 1920s and the 1930s, and form a nose putty nose. Or he'd take some grease paint and show me the way they used to do their makeup in the old black and white films. He taught me how to read by giving me old film scripts to read. But one day, I was 5 years old, and he said, "Get dressed up in a suit." He put on his fedora hat. He was always dressed immaculately. We got into his 1949 Packard, and we drove down to the Screen Actors Guild, and he started to talk in Italian to Ken Orsatti, who was the president of the guild at that time. And I walked out with a SAG card. And you could do that back then, but he paid all the
Right.
fees and paid everything for me. It was different back then.
So your grandfather, did your grandfather have a stage name or anything? Because everyone's going to be yelling at me going, what's his name? What's his name?
Right.
Is it any,
Stephen, Stephen, Soldi,
okay.
Soldi.
What do you remember being your first kind of acting experience that you can remember?
I was on a talent show called Juvenile Jury. And
Allison Arngrim did that.
okay,
Did you ever work with Allison on that thing? I'd never heard it mentioned before I just interviewed her.
I don't remember her. It's quite possible
Okay.
we could have done it together. But it was one of those shows, 1970, where talent agents would watch it and see if there was a kid that was precocious enough for them to sign. Dorothy
Right.
Dorothy Day Otis found out who I was, and so I signed with Dorothy Day Otis. And I
Which
remember,
again is another connection point
oh
because my
yes,
brother and I were with Dorothy
mhm,
Day Otis.
yes.
We were with Herb Tannen. We
Mhm.
all shared the same agents.
I know, I know. We all had the same agents. We all bounced back and forth to them,
Yep.
the ebb and flow of the years, if it was good, if it was bad, whatever it was. Nobody had any bad feelings, but we went to some of the same agents 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
But Dorothy signed me, and I remember the Jolly Roger restaurant in the lobby floor of her building there that was right by the dome, right?
Yep.
I started to go on auditions, and I wasn't afraid of anything. I felt a responsibility to do a good job for Grandpa Soldi because
Uh-huh.
I loved him so much. I wanted to be like him. And he had already showed me pictures of himself in his portfolios. So if I went on a studio lot and I was on the back lot, I suddenly saw where he was standing in something.
Wow.
And,
So
and
you like, yeah, especially at Universal, you worked a lot at Universal, and
yeah,
Universal did all those monster movies.
right, Universal and also Warner Brothers. I could
Uh-huh.
see him in the gangster films that he had done. There he is, right there, and I could go back and look at the picture of it in his portfolio. And it's
What was your first job that you remember, like, that you got as a professional actor?
the first job that I got was right before I met you. Um, was All in the Family,
Okay.
and I played a little boy that an actress named Marcia Rod. She's still with us. She's a good friend of my buddy Jim Raymond, who used to be Collie Vidal's boyfriend many years ago. I still talk to Jim. Marcia Rod shows up at the door, and Edith answers the door, and Marcia Rod says, "This is Meathead's kid." She pushes me through the door, and they're all trying to figure out, what Rob Reiner was doing that he's got a kid. Well, at the end, you find out after a half hour of me sitting in Archie Bunker's chair and eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and falling asleep on the couch, the woman was going to look for a job. She knew of him. She just needed a place to stash me. It wasn't his kid. And it ends with kind of a dramatic scene, the way that she leaves with me.
Now,
And
All in the Family's a huge show from day one, and Carol O'Connor was a big deal. Gene Stapleton, Rob Ryan. I mean, these are all not only big stars now, but big stars then. Do
yes,
you remember any of that? Were they nice to you? What was the set like?
I remember everything of every job that I've ever done. So, you ready?
Wow.
Okay.
Bring it.
I didn't have dialogue, but I had to interact with all of those people. And we rehearsed for a week in a rehearsal hall over at CBS, right there off of.
Wow, they did a whole week of rehearsal before they
Yeah.
shoot.
And you
Okay.
went into a rehearsal hall. It looks similar to a dance studio with me,
Mhm.
except there were no mirrors on the wall. And they had a couple of key pieces of the furniture from the set on the rehearsal hall. And the walls were laid out in gaffer's tape on the floor so that the actors, had a better sense of where, the kitchen wall ended, where the upstairs went up, the stairs
And
going.
this is at Television City down at Fairfax in
Right,
Beverly?
Television City,
Okay.
yeah, right there over by the farmers market where you and I used to
Yeah.
hang out all the time too. And that it was a big education for me because Carol O'Connor was a very famous actor. So was Gene Stapleton. They had both done a lot
Mhm.
of stage. Sally Struthers, of course, was there. Rob Reiner was there. Marcia Rod was there for her scenes that she was doing. But we rehearsed this thing like a play for a week in front of all of these studio executives. Sometimes it was just the director and 3 or 4 of the writers. Norman Lear, I'm sure, was there. Um,
Uh-huh.
I knew it was very, very important. And Carol O'Connor took the show extremely serious. That was his face,
Yeah.
his character sort of led the charge for that show. He was on top of everything, and for good reason. He wanted it to be good. He wanted it to mean something. He was always completely off book, where sometimes the other people, they were still off page. A lot of stuff to memorize, a lot of pressure. Can you imagine?
Was there, I mean, you wouldn't have lines like you said, but did, like in a regular sitcom, they're writing all week in a different script. You'll start on Monday and by Friday it's a different show.
Oh,
Was it like that, or was it a very similar script each day?
uh, no, it was the same script every single day that they were working on.
Wow.
They'd make adjustments. Maybe they'd bring in a pink or a blue or a green, and change out
Uh-huh.
pages. But I felt, even as a young guy, 6 years old, I was witnessing something that was really, really unique and special. So
Yeah.
we rehearsed on that stage for a week, and then we went to go and do a dry run on the set. So now they picked up Archie Bunker's chair that's now in the Smithsonian, and Edith's chair, and they put it on the stage where they were
Uh-huh.
shooting this. And I saw the set for the first time. And
Had you seen the show? Because you're a young
oh,
kid. It's not like
yes.
you're, oh,
Oh,
okay.
yeah, yeah. Everybody watched that show. My grandfather
Yeah.
used to love to watch the show. Sam and Stella watched the show. So I was very familiar with that show. But now I'm standing on the set after 4 or 5 days of rehearsing on the rehearsal stage, and it was really spectacular. And we did a dry run tape
Uh-huh.
with no audience, and then later on in the afternoon, the first audience came in. We did it in front of a live audience. Then we did it a second night. I believe that was a Friday or a Saturday, in front of another audience. So, of course, they did the dry run tape so that they could have cutaways in case something
Mm-hmm.
happened during the live. They had 2 lives that they could intercut things. So they just covered themselves.
Now, I just had the opportunity to talk to Carol Burnett, which we'll get to in a second, because you did the Carol Burnett show, which was like right next door
Right.
to all at CBS.
Mhm.
But she said that they did their shows like as best as they could, so that the audience was there a very short period of time, just like it's a live show.
Mhm.
When we did See Dad Run, which was a sitcom, or
Mhm.
most sitcoms, you can be there 4 or 5 hours shooting a half an hour of television.
Yeah.
What was All in the Family like? Was it like a little miniature play, or did they do retakes on the day, or how fast did it go?
I can't remember retakes. Everybody was so on top of it.
Mm-hmm.
I do remember one time the voice of the director came over the loudspeaker and gave Miss Rod some direction while we were on the couch, and she was putting my moccasins on because I'm supposed to be asleep. And she was a very skilled actress as well, done a lot of theater, but it was like doing a play. It really
Yeah.
was, and wonderful memories of it. They
I'm
all
kind of all over the place here, and I apologize, but
That's all
I'm picturing this. You're like
at,
you said, you're around 6 years old.
right at the very end. Okay, they all did like a little curtain call, and they all bowed in
Uh-huh.
front of the audience and they waved at people. Carol O'Connor said, "Where's Mrs. Manley?" And they said, "Oh, she's right over there." He said, "Gimme Stephen." He took me by the hand with him, and he and I walked out, and he said, "Bow." We bowed. He said, "Good job, kid." And he took me back.
Oh my
Yeah,
gosh, that's amazing. So
something else.
when you're this age, this would be like the first time you'd see yourself on television, right?
Right. Mhm.
What was that like for you?
I was watching Grandpa Soldi to get my critique, right? He watched the show air, and I was watching him to say, "Hey, this is my first job. It's what you did. It's what I'm doing now. How did I do? What do you want me to change? What you want me to do?" And he picked me up. He gave me a big hug. And then about 3 or 4 weeks later, I booked the Carol Burnett show.
Wow. And what
And
was that experience like?
it was the same. It was at the same
Mhm.
facility. It was at CBS there, right off of Beverly and Fairfax. And again, they had the set marked out on a rehearsal hall with gaffer's tape on the floor for the walls and just some rudimentary pieces of furniture until they went to shoot. The scene was there was an orphanage, and all these little kids want to be adopted. And of course, Tim Conway is one of the orphans, and they got him in short pants. And Harvey Korman and Carol Burnett show up, and they say, "Well, he's too old. We want this little guy." And with each child, Tim Conway says, "Oh, well, he wets the bed and he plays with matches." This one eats too much, and this one cries all night long. And so eventually, of course, they end up walking away. The gag is they end up walking away with Tim Conway. But something happened. We were on the rehearsal stage, and Grandpa Soldi had walked up to Stella earlier in the morning, and he said, "If you see Carol Burnett, give her this." Okay?
Okay.
So there was an envelope with a photograph in it. And I remember we were rehearsing, and we took a break, and Stella very gingerly walked up to Carol Burnett, and she said, "Miss Burnett, may I talk to you for a second?" And I remember this clear as day, Patrick, clear as day. Stella's to the right, Carol Burnett is to the left. And she said, "Oh, sure." And she said, "My grandfather worked with you. He wanted to see if you remembered him." And she pulled out a color lobby card from Who's Been Sleeping in My Bed that had Carol Burnett, the other actors, and Grandpa Soldi next to Carol Burnett, as I think he's a doctor, and he's looking at her and he's about to put the stethoscope on her because she's in shock in this comedy scene. And she, you know what she said? She said, "Oh my God, that's Mr. Soldi."
She's amazing with that. She's so fast. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh.
Stella teared up. She
Yeah.
said he wanted to say hello. This is his grandson, my son, who's just starting acting. And Carol Burnett said, "My God, I remember working with him. He went back to the silent era. He would tell these stories of working with all of these people. He was a delightful man." And I'll never forget that. Never forget that.
Oh my God. What a great story. Okay. So I just want to go over some of these things just because the people have to understand. So this is the IMDb. I'm just reading straight from the IMDb. The Carol Burnett Show, All in the Family. That's just the first two things on your IMDb. Then it goes on. Kansas City Bomber we'll get to. Young Dr. Kildare, The FBI, Honor Thy Father, Police Story, Marcus Welby, The Rookies, Policewoman, Emergency, Adam 12, Kung Fu, Mannix, Streets of San Francisco. Dude, you worked a ton.
Yeah.
And when you're that young, I remember the feeling of it being understanding it's a job, and there was competition. It's like, it's not, I don't understand people when they, it's like, it's an art form, but you want to get the part. I still hold Robbie Rist in low esteem because he got the part on Mary Tyler Moore that I wanted. He played Ted Knight's kid, and I wanted to play Ted Knight's kid.
Right.
But you and I were always going up against each other for these things. I didn't get the Emergency. I didn't get the Marcus Welby. I didn't get any of those. You did. What was your feeling when you would go on audition? How would you what was your thought about all of that?
Well, considering that I met you right after Carol Burnett Show, before I started to get some other roles, and I struck out as well. This brings up something that maybe I should bring up right now, and it goes along with what you're asking me. We're talking about a different period of time.
For sure,
we're talking about, now there were the 3 and 4 camera live shows, but there were also film television shows, filmed motion pictures, and there were still crews that went back to the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, some of the older guys, okay? And there's some new fellas in there too, younger guys, hippie.
People would still wear ties to the set.
Sure. And when I was watching you speak with Ike, and he was bringing up other names, and then you and I always bring up names too. Look, we're friends 55 years later, man. We were all professionals, and there was something about the era and the type of work that we were doing, the type of people that we were, what was expected of us, and how we handled ourselves on sets. You loved the work. I loved the work. I wanted to make Grandpa Soldi proud because I loved him so very much. I also knew how to conduct myself on a set as you did, as Ike did, as Jackie Haley did, as Lance Kerwin did, as
Mm-hmm.
everybody did. Everybody was a pro. I remember sitting several times in those hallways, whether it was at Warner Brothers, Universal down underneath the Bank of America building, uh, Columbia, Fox. I'd see you, I'd see Brandon Cruz. I saw all those people, and yeah, we were competing against each other, or we were competing to play opposite in a scene or something like that. But everybody was professional. Nobody ever hated anybody. Nobody was vindictive. We were
Right.
all
Right.
really, really pro. And, some of us, I'll mention it. I worked with Jodie Foster in the Kansas City Bombers. Some people were unbelievable to work with. They were just jaw-droppingly good
Right.
and mature so far beyond their years at 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. I worked with Christy McNichol. She came across like she was 25 years old.
Did you see
Uh,
Once Upon a Time in Hollywood?
yes, I did.
Okay, so you remember the girl in that scene with DiCaprio where she's like the precocious young actress?
Yes,
Uh,
I do.
it's like I remember working with kids like that, and
Mhm.
I talked to Melissa and Allison about, like, do you think it was based on you? And it's like it was based on, I think, all of the kids at that point, like with
Mhm.
that type of professionalism. You mentioned the uh, Kansas City Bomber. Sounds
Mhm.
like Kansas City Bomber.
Yeah,
I know it because you played Raquel Welch's kid, right?
right.
I didn't know Jodie Foster was in it.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about that. I mean, what was it like to work with those women? I mean, amazing.
Again, I remember every single detail. How can you ever forget? The first thing that happened, they cast me as her son. Again, I had no dialogue. I started to get cast as these very solemn, uh, deep set eyed waif children. Think of Jack Wild, the Artful Dodger.
Yeah.
I started to
I
be.
know, I know, I know, I know. I'm the worst interviewer in the world, but I'm sitting here thinking you must have auditioned for The Omen. Did you audition for The Omen? You'd have been perfect for The Omen.
Something I can't remember. I did audition for Salem's Lot. Lance booked a slot in Salem's Lot. I wasn't going out for his role.
And
Uh,
Brad Savage was in that as well, didn't he? Wasn't Brad Savage
I
in?
I think so. I used to see
Yeah.
Brad. I used to see Brad Savage
Yeah.
all the time. Um,
Sorry, I cut you off.
that's
Because
okay.
I had auditioned for Omen too. But
Okay.
again, the blue eyes, the dark hair, it's like
Right.
you were perfect for Damien.
Right.
But so you're with
I
right
got
at that point, she was like, what, 3 million years BC? What was the movie that she had done that everyone was like freaking out about?
right
Anyways,
with her famous poster and in the
yeah,
bikini. Yeah, that was in the later part of the
late,
'60s, right?
right.
And then she had done some other movies. She
And
had
so
an in,
this was in 72, so it's still
right,
pretty close to that era.
right.
It's
She had an interest in. I believe she was one of the producers, but it didn't really list her as one. Okay.
uh-huh.
Close friend of hers, or it might have been her boyfriend at the time, perhaps, was the director of the film. So it was a very important role for her. She wasn't necessarily playing a sex symbol. It was more of a drama for her, playing a roller derby queen. Um, They shot our scenes in Oregon because the team that she was on was from Oregon, and she
Uh-huh.
wanted to go and her character was supposed to go and visit her estranged children who were living with her mom. And again, I was a very sullen kid. I never saw my mom. I didn't want to speak to her, etc., etc. The wonderful thing about that was we got to the airport because they flew us from Los Angeles to Portland, Oregon, and a blonde girl shows up who's a couple of years older than me. And Stella turns around and says, Brandy. And Jodie's mom says, Stella. They had known each other in the early 50s. Had
Oh my
seen
gosh.
each
So
other
she
since,
knew Jodie Foster's mom?
yeah, many, many years before. And so they sat
This has
together.
got to be one of the first things that Jodie had done as well, besides the suntan lotion I had.
Well, I believe she had done Samantha and the Lion, I believe. Had she done
Okay.
Huckleberry Finn with Johnny Whitaker.
Okay, Johnny Whitaker.
Right. She had already done some heavy hitting things. I fell in love with Jodie. She was so professional, so smart. She did all of her schoolwork in French. So she was bilingual at 8 and 9 years old. Me, 2 plus 2 was 22, right? That's as far as I went. I was good as an actor, lousy as a student, but she took good care of me on the set. When we had to do schoolwork and stuff, she'd supervise my schoolwork. She tried to teach me French a little bit. She was right on target. She knew where the camera was going. She knew where it was shooting from. I mean, she was advanced beyond her years, incredibly, as many of us were, but there were some exceptions to that. Jodie.
She's absolutely one of those super beings. Yeah.
And we became good friends, but I remember working, Jodie had to roller skate with Raquel Welch down a sidewalk for the scene. I was sitting on a porch swing. Mm-hmm. And Raquel Welch comes up and she tries to hug me and show me some affection, and I just have to be cold to her, which upsets her. And then later on, there's a scene where I'm in a vacant lot and she's kneeling in front of me and she's really upset, tears running down her face. She's trying to get me to talk to her. And I have the only distinction in the history of cinema of being the only male to run away from Raquel Welch. But it's a touching moment in the film. And she was really digging deep. She really was. I remember her filming that scene. It was quite touching. I knew I was in the presence of a movie star and a big name talent. She was.
Now, that's a great thing to say. I get that. Because I felt the same way about Michael Landon. Mm-hmm. How would you describe, what makes a person a movie star when you're in their presence? How do you feel it?
With Carol O'Connor and everybody on All in the Family, like I said, it was like working on a play. And I could see that side of them. Because I could see them asking questions of their characters and trying to solve problems in performance, right? Mm-hmm. Same with the Carol Burnett show. And she was so elegant and she remembered my grandfather. I'll never forget that in my life. When we showed up on the set for Raquel Welch, there was a line of fans around the block. And they had to have police barricades keeping them back and forming a queue. And I remember distinctly one of the crew members, his jaw was dropped when she walked by. He was an older man at the time, I'm going to say in his mid to late 60s. And I remember he was just enamored with her when she walked by. And I knew I was in the presence of somebody of that, type
caliber,
of, that type of thing, So I knew it was very, very unique.
What an amazing adventure. You do all these TV shows that it's so funny. I'm looking at these names. Billy. We played a lot of Billies. There was lots of Billies. My brother did an episode of The Rookies. Policewoman. What was Policewoman? What was like, again, let's go straight to another woman star. You got Angie Dickinson, who's a huge star in the 70s.
Right.
Earl Holliman and Police Story. And
Angie Dickinson was a really nice lady.
We'll be back after these messages. Hey there, my name is Patrick Labyorteaux, and I play an actor on TV. And I also have this acting school called Working Actors School. And what we do there is we teach people to act using Zoom. So you can take an acting class with me and with a person in Connecticut, in Florida, and San Diego all at the same time, thanks to the miracle of Zoom. And I'm very excited to announce that we have a brand new class called Adult weekly class. Now, what is that? Now, that's a class that'll meet every Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. Pacific, and you come in and you have an hour-long acting class with other students. It's very, very simple, very, very fun. So if you've ever wanted to be an actor or try it or just mess around, these classes are great. So the adult weekly class is going to be every Wednesday at 5:30 Pacific. Now come and check it out. It's going to be really fun. Go to workingactorschool.com. Check out the website. You can sign up for the class there. If you need any other information, there's a phone number and an email on the website. You can get it there. And we would love to have you come and try. Talk to you soon. Act 2, Success. Okay, so let's get to this, because at least by my count, you have 3 credits where you're young blank. In Kung Fu, you're young Caine,
Yes.
right?
Mm-hmm.
In the Howard Hughes thing, you're young Howard Hughes.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, in Star Trek, you're young Spock. Is there
Right.
any other young versions of people?
Oh my gosh, let me think here. I think you've got it covered. Unless there's something.
Okay, so let's start with Kung Fu.
Okay.
So again, huge TV show.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody reads for it because it was, they had lots of kids on the show for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
Shot in the backlot of Warner Brothers, where we ended up shooting the same little western town was where we shot Blazing Saddles.
Oh, that's
what was it like shooting Kung Fu and playing? Did you get to work with David Carradine?
I did. I did get to work with David Carradine. I also got to work with Rodimus, who played David Carradine with the bald cap on his.
Right. Who ended up also, Rodimus ended up being, I think, a boyfriend to Allison or somebody, or Melissa Sue on Little House.
Gotcha.
Rodimus Para.
I think they hired me. I was small. They wanted to bring in a little guy the last season of the show so that they could show young Caine starting at the monastery. And then they would also have scenes with Rodimus where he's like, 15, 16 years old. And then they would show David Carradine. So they wanted to just add some more dimension to his character. I got the job, I think, because I loved the show. It was an awesome show, and I could emulate his speech because he had
a man.
Exactly. But I took it seriously. So when I got the audition for it, I thought, wow, young Caine, okay, and I tried to dig deep down there and give them some of what I thought David Carradine was. I think that's what booked that for me. It was a great experience. Did that for a year. That was the whole last year of the show. I think I'm in maybe 3 or 4 episodes, and they staggered them throughout the year. David Carradine was very much into his character and professional to work with. We got along just fine, but I could tell when actors are in it, don't bug them, because it takes a lot of concentration, to do what they're doing, and they want to do a good job. And I enjoyed myself. I liked working with Rodimus. He was very, very nice to me. I watched them put on his bald cap, and then at the end of shooting, he said, "Now watch this," and he tore the whole thing off of his head. It was the first time that I ever really saw a makeup like that, and I remember them with a brush putting little hairs, stippling it on his bald cap, so it had the shade of
the reality
of head. Yeah.
So you did the year or so on Kung Fu, then you do Mannix, Streets of San Francisco, which I never did, but apparently if you were an actor in the 70s, you did one. I didn't get to do one. You did 2 of them.
I did too.
And then it was the Hindenburg before you did the Howard Hughes thing, or movies take a while.
Yeah, Howard Hughes.
So you were in this huge movie, the Hindenburg, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
What was that like?
It was Universal Studios' biggest film, I think, at the time. And my buddy, you remember Tiger
This is
Woods?
like in 75, so like right before Jaws. So this was like a huge hit. Yeah.
Right. They shot it, let's see, August through November is when I was shooting the Hindenburg of 74. My buddy my buddy Tiger Williams was shooting Earthquake. You remember Tiger?
Okay. Yeah, I remember Tiger. Yeah.
Yeah, he played Genevieve Bujold's son and crashed in the LA River on his bicycle in Earthquake. And then Todd Lookinland was in the Towering Inferno, So,
Right.
right, all of us were in peril, at that particular time. What was interesting about the Hindenburg was the detail, because the period costumes were just top notch, immaculate.
Uh-huh.
Right?
Do you remember would you let's talk about costumes, because there was a place here, Western Costumer, that was on Melrose. It was like 4 or 5 stories that was just filled with everything.
Yeah.
They've taken it down. It's out in the valley now.
I
But
know.
every time you'd go on a big movie, you'd go up there.
Yes.
I did a lot of Westerns. I'm sure you were there. What was all that costuming at Western Costumers, or was it at Universal for the Hindenburg?
It was at Universal, and also they took you out shopping. We went to the costume department at Universal, which was right next to the old makeup building at the top of the hill. The fire station was on the left. The famous makeup building with the big red doors. Remember?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then to the right was the wardrobe department, which was built in the 30s. It was just bursting with all kinds of stuff. The fellow
and at this time, Universal had a tour, but the tour was just a tram that would drive around and point at people shooting, basically. There was really nothing there.
Right. They had the collapsing bridge. They had some the boulders that rolled down the hill. They had a prop plaza. They had the Red Sea, it would go
right.
And they had they had the stunt show and the animal actor show, things like that. And the tour tram would go by the wardrobe department. If you remember, there was a bay window at the wardrobe department, and whatever movie was hot at the time, they dressed the mannequins in the people's wardrobes.
Yeah.
They're sitting there. But we got a call from the wardrobe department. They took myself and the other young guy to Saks Fifth Avenue in Beverly Hills. Because the script said Buster Brown's suits, which were from the 1930s, and they had a hard time finding something that they liked in their inventory, so they bought us 2 corduroy suits with vests. They chose the shirts. The hats came from inventory at wardrobe, and then the pants, they hemmed them. They cut them off at the knees to make them short, and they gave us penny loafers, because penny loafers go back to the 20s, the teens. That's something that could have worked. What I remember, one of the first days of filming on the lot, because first they shot over at El Toro Marine Base in Anaheim, Santa Ana.
Yeah, right outside of Anaheim. We shot JAG there a couple times. It's now decommissioned, but it's a huge Marine base.
Right. They've got the Zeppelin hangars. So they hung swastika flags all over it to be Frankfurt, Germany. And then at the end of the film, they put American flags up so it could be New Jersey, right? Magic. But one of the things that struck me was they had people that built that Zeppelin on that set, helping with how it looked, and working with the art department.
They had people who built the Zeppelin helping actual Zeppelin craftsmen.
Right.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, guys that built the Graf Zeppelin, guys that built the Hindenburg. They were present.
It's really weird when you think, because we were so young when we did these things. I tell a story about the Wizard of Oz and finding the place where we were shooting at the Little House. When you think about it, if you're shooting in 74, 40 years before that was when it happened. This is literally, it's further along since the movie than it was when the actual disaster happened.
Yeah, I know.
So these guys were actually alive.
Yes, they pulled people to help.
Did they build the whole Zeppelin at Universal as well, or just at El Toro?
No, what they did was they built the undercarriage of the passenger deck and the gondola, and they would keep it up in the top of the frame so that the gangways would go down and the actors would walk up into a platform. But it gave the illusion that the Zeppelin was above our head, But what they did on the soundstage is they built the nose cone just about full scale on a soundstage at Universal. It wasn't stage 27. I believe it was stage 12.
Okay.
They built sections of the inside of the Zeppelin with the girders and the gas bags and the gangway
Right.
that went up and down, and the tubes with the ladders that went up and down. They built that on stage 12. They built, it was just about full size, a section of the left flank of the fin, because William Atherton has to sew it up when it tears and go outside of it. So they built that on stage 12. On stage 27 at Universal Studios, they had the gondola full size. And it had all of the wheels, the rudders, all that kind of stuff. And then they had the passenger area. The passenger area, they built half of it because the way the Zeppelin was built, it kind of mirrored itself on either side of the ship, the starboard or the port side.
Mm-hmm.
But they had, like I said, they had people who worked on the Hindenburg advising the art department what kind of things to use to make it look like that. They even brought in plates, and the art department had Zeppelin company decals, water slide decals, like we'd put on a model,
Wow.
and they'd rim the plates with that, and the coffee cups and the saucers. And I remember I asked one of the prop guys, I said, "Where did you get these?" And he said, "Oh, we had decals made that matched the spec of the originals." They had
Does young Stephen Manley have a Hindenburg coffee cup at home?
No, I don't. But what was interesting was,
Oh, the humanity.
yes, what was interesting was this. We were doing the scene on one of the smaller stages where they built the check-in, where you got your ticket, and they're searching everybody's luggage, and then they let you through. Myself, the young man playing my older brother, who was about a year or two older than me, the young lady playing my sister, who was 18, and oh my goodness, what's her name? Catherine Hellman played my mom. Alan Oppenheimer played my dad.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
A guy came walking over with another crew member, and he was staring at us. And he was a big, tall, like a Navy man. And he looked at us and he said, "I saw you. I saw you. I didn't see you. And I saw your mom. I didn't see the dad." And you could just see in his eyes when the crash was going on, he just stared at us. It was a really surreal moment.
Wait. So this guy was really there, and he's telling you that he saw the real people that you were portraying?
Right. He was one of the Navy linesmen holding onto the ship when it blew up. And he was talking, he was telling Robert Wise or something, this and that and the other, a detail or whatever it was, and then he just kind of turned around like this, and he saw us. So he saw me. He pointed, he said, "I remember I saw you." And then he stared at the kid that played my brother. He said, "I saw you." He looked at Catherine Hellman and he said, "I saw you." And you could see it in his face. Now he looked at Alan Oppenheimer and he said, "I didn't see you." And he looked at the girl playing my sister and he said, "I didn't see you." And there was a reason. Many years ago, there was a documentary on the Hindenburg, now with CGI technology and all kinds of stuff, and they pretty much figured out what brought the ship down at this point with a lot of experiments. They analyzed the burn pattern, and they built mock-ups of the ship, and they filled it with hydrogen, and nothing would cause the way. The mushroom cloud came up, and the tail sank, and the fire blew out the nose. And then they finally got some information from somebody who was there, but they were in an area where they had a different angle of the ship. It was a kid and his dad. And the dad said, "Oh, hey, look, it must have one of those new neon electric lights on the tail." And then they figured out it was St. Elmo's fire. They were valving hydrogen out of it. the ship was kind of coming in at an angle. And so they built a mock-up of the ship and they did a test, and sure enough, they were valving hydrogen out of it. They had a fan blowing it as if it was moving, and the damn thing blew up exactly the same. The mushroom
Oh my
cloud came out,
God.
the tail fell, and the fire blew out of the nose. There was a man in there, and he said with a German accent, "My name is Werner Dörner, and I was one of the children on the Hindenburg." And I went, my God, I played young Werner Dörner in the Hindenburg. He was the last survivor of the ship.
Oh man, is that crazy?
Yes, and he was speaking about his experience, and I called one of his relatives who was working in Santa Barbara as a professor. I told her this. She said, "My God, I just got chills." The way it worked out in the film wasn't exactly the way that it happened in real life, but they were getting ready to land. The dad went back to get his camera. The ship blew up. Everybody toppled, and the young girl who was the sister was screaming for her dad and went into the ship to find him. The
Oh
mom
man.
the mom picked up the boys and threw them out the window before jumping out herself. When when the ship crashed, they found the sister. She was alive. She was so badly burned that the nurses at the hospital passed out, and then she died. And the man perished inside. So it was a horrible,
Oh
horrible
my
story.
God.
Yeah,
Well,
that's
look,
why that's why
that's
the gentleman looked at us,
yeah.
like this,
Like
and
they know that he
and
knew.
he looked at the young lady playing my sister and said, "I didn't see you. That's why. That's what happened." But he also looked at Robert Clary and he said, "I remember you," because Robert Clary played the acrobat who
No,
went
but
out.
Robert Clary, wasn't he at Stalag 17? Wasn't he in The Great Escape? I mean, he was in a prison camp.
That's right. He was in
He was
Holy
busy.
Heroes.
He was
Right.
busy. Okay, so uh, just your resume is so crazy big, dude. Okay, so I want to hear what happened with you and playing on what's his name, Howard Hughes.
Howard
But
Hughes.
we also have to talk about Star Trek for sure.
Sure. Okay.
But it's so weird. You and I have a very similar stretch here. You did a Love Boat. I did a Love Boat.
Oh.
You were one of the few, the proud, that did an Aloha Paradise, of which I did an Aloha Paradise. So
Right.
before we get into the other stories, on Little House, you played the magnificent Marco Gambini, Marco Gambini. So the great Gambini.
Right.
What was your experience were we in anything on Little House together? I know you had a scene with my brother.
No,
I don't think we worked together.
we didn't. We were always around each other. We were dear friends. We shared love of all of these different movies and all of these kinds of things.
Yeah.
We never had a chance to work together. Which
But
by
you did work with on my brother on Little House, and it says you worked on Whiz Kids, but it's uncredited. Did you
I
do
did a
anything on Whiz
voice
Kids?
I did a voiceover job for Whiz Kids.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So I'll try and streamline all of my craziness. So with Little House, what was your experience on Little House on the Prairie?
Okay, I'm going to tell you straight. This is what happened with Little House on the Prairie. How long was the show on? 9 years? 8 years?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was only good for 4 years because that's all I was on.
We're friends. You're on the show.
Yeah.
Matthew's on the show. Other friends of mine were on the show, right? Okay.
Yeah.
I auditioned for Michael Landon for 9 years. He basically watches me go from what was I, 9, 10 years old until I'm 16, on the cusp of 17. So I would go and audition for him, first over at Paramount when it was over at Paramount, and then over at MGM when it was still MGM. I would audition for him over there. Okay. I would always get down to the callbacks. It would get between myself and maybe 2 or 3 other people. I'd go in for my final audition. I'd pour my guts out for him. at doing whatever it was. And a couple of times during the auditions, he would kind of get emotional and he would say, "That was really good, Steve. You're a good actor. Thank you for coming in. That was a great performance." And I wouldn't book a job. Okay. And, like you were saying with Ike, you put them out there. If they stick, wonderful. If they don't stick, you move on to the next one. You just,
Yeah.
you develop a hard shell, and it just wasn't what they were looking for.
And also, as an actor, if they're bringing you in like that, they have a high respect of your ability because they
Right,
know you're going to be good, but you're just not right for that one part.
right. So it's the last season of the show, right?
Uh-huh.
And there's not going to be any more Little House on the Prairie. And my buddy Patrick's on it. Other people I know have been on it. Matthew's been on it for many, many years. Okay. They call me for Marco Gambini in Gambini the Great. Okay.
Uh-huh.
And the casting director, was it Susan?
Yeah, Sue Sookman.
Right, Susan. When she calls me in, she looks at me and she just kind of laughs. And she said, "You want to do your scene?" I said, "Yeah, I've prepared it for you." So she reads the scene. I do the scene. She throws the script aside. She says, "You're a good actor. You should be in the." I said, "Yeah, my friends are in it." So it gets down to myself as either an older teenager version of Marco Gambini, the acrobat whose family is traveling through Walnut Grove that do daredevil, Houdini type acts, or
Uh-huh.
or they thought maybe it should be a younger character, 12 years old, 11 years old. So Susan sends me over. She said Michael Landon's on a soundstage. His dressing room was, that little thing that was inside the soundstage, the little
Yeah.
room on wheels, right?
Yep.
A little 50s camper type thing. And the young guy goes in first, does his audition. He comes out in a few minutes and splits. I hear, "Okay, Stephen, come on in." Take a deep breath, got my script, I'm memorized. I walk in. He said, "Okay, let's do the scene." And he had somebody read with me. So I do the scene, and he does it again. He says, "Good actor, Steve. Thank you for coming in. You did a great performance." And I said, "Thank you for seeing me, Mr. Landon." Now, I'm not a forward person, but I got to the door and something told me to just ask him. And I turned around and I said, "Excuse me, Mr. Landon, can I ask you a question?" And he said, "Yes, go ahead, Stephen." I said, "All my friends have been on this show." I said, "Matt is on the show." I said, "My buddy Pat has been on this show." And I said, "You've been seeing me for 9 years, and you say I do a great job, and you never hire me." And he looked down and he pulled up the script and he said, "I'll see you Monday, Steve." And he gave me the script.
Oh, what a great story. What a
Now,
great story.
we were shooting the first day on Gambini the Great. There was a scene where my dad's in a hospital bed because he did a stunt that was too severe. Michael Landon had been sick. He had run himself down, getting some of these episodes out and stuff like that. And I believe this was it was a Monday, but he spent Friday, Saturday, Sunday in the hospital to get
Oh my God.
well so he could make it through the rest of the week and get Gambini the Great shot. He's feeling okay. Sam took me to the set that day, right? And we were
Uh-huh.
starting to run late. I had a kind of an emotional scene with my dad. I had a scene with the guy playing my older brother, and I was so happy to be working with Michael Landon. It was Monday night. He started talking to Sam. Now, Sam had been a cop. He was in Korea. He had a piece of a hand grenade inside of his chest that he got in Korea, being in the airborne, and all these types of things. Had been shot on the police force. Men loved Sam. They just did.
Yeah.
And so Michael Landon said, "How you doing, Sam?" And he said, "Oh, I'm doing great, Mr. Landon." He said, "Oh, call me Michael." So Michael Landon lights up a cigarette. Sam lights up a cigarette. And Michael Landon looks at his watch and he says, "Boy, Monday Night Football is tonight and it's starting in like a half hour and we still have a bunch of stuff to shoot." And he said, "You know what I'm going to do, Sam? Hang on." He made a phone call and had a television brought in so that the crew, while they were working, could watch the game.
Yeah, I remember. I remember Michael. Michael loves sports, and
Uh-huh.
remember the walk-off homer that Kurt Gibson did in the big. It was like, I think, a World Series. Michael, back in the day when no one had phones or anything,
Mhm.
Michael had this tiny little TV
Mhm.
that, a Sony little portable. I mean,
Yeah.
it was like this big, but it was like tiny at the time. And he was watching the Dodger game and the Kurt Gibson thing at some big event where we all had to wear tuxedos. I forget the event. And, it's like very, not solemn, but very, prescribed speeches and everything. And
Right.
in the corner, you hear Michael Lennon go, "Yeah!" because he was watching the sports. But Michael would do that. I mean, he was awesome. That's a
Yeah.
great, great story.
I just,
So
yeah.
you had this great experience on Little House, but let's backwards up here. So
Mhm.
you're working, you get this job to play Howard Hughes, and then we'll finish up with Star Trek because I want to hear all about Star Trek.
All
But
right.
with Howard Hughes, so you're working on Howard Hughes, and what was your experience there? I mean, how was that whole? How did that all happen, and what happened with you?
It was a big TV movie at the time, either a one or a two-parter. It was called Howard the Amazing Mr. Hughes. And
Okay.
they cast Tommy Lee Jones as Howard Hughes. And I think he had done a couple of really good independent films in the mid 70s and was on the map at this point,
Uh-huh.
as a young man, as an actor. And it's an interesting story because it's kind of a landmark moment for me that ends up being another landmark moment for me, which leads to Star Trek later on.
Oh, okay.
Uh, uh, as we all did, I took the craft part of it very seriously. I I always wanted to figure out how actors came to the emotional choices that they made, even as a young guy. Even the silent actors that my grandfather had me watch. I loved watching Lon Chaney pull up his
Yeah.
emotion in the silent films. Uh, to this day, I always reference silent actors when I'm working because they had to do it with body language and emotion. So this was my first step into, quote, oh my gosh, method acting, right? Was Tommy Lee Jones. There was a sequence in that where he has a surreal talk with himself as a younger guy
So
who's about,
Howard Hughes is talking as an adult, is talking to young Howard Hughes.
exactly. He's
Okay.
talking to a 12-year-old Howard Hughes who's dressed in the period of clothing, from, the teens, right?
Uh-huh.
And it was like a 3 or 4 page dialogue scene with him. And we were shooting by a train track. I can't remember where it was. It was kind of a rural area somewhere. Nice crew, nice people. It was summertime. I didn't really have school. The social worker was there, the teacher, but I didn't
Hmm.
really have school. Tommy Lee Jones comes over to Stella and he says, "Are you Mrs. Manley?" She says, "Yes." He says, "I'm Tommy Lee Jones." She said, "Nice to meet you, Mr. Jones." She was kind of like, "Oh my God." He said, "May I borrow Stephen for a little while? They're going to take a while setting this thing up, maybe an hour, hour and a half. I want to rehearse with him. We're going to go right over there. You can see us right over by where that train thing is. We're just going to sit over there, but I feel it's important for our performance." And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Yes, absolutely." And he took me over 40 yards away. We sat on, the edge of an open train. And he said, "Stephen, what I want to do with you," he said, "is tell me about yourself, and I'm going to tell you about myself. And that way I can absorb some of you, and you can absorb some of me, because we're supposed to be the same person at different ages, and we can take that and meld that into our performance. And then we'll just do a couple of exercises back and forth. Can you do that?" Boy, I was all game for it. That was an acting class
Yeah.
you know, from the best.
You say you remember everything. What kind of stuff were you guys sharing with each other to get to the core of this Howard Hughes guy?
Well, he had me, of course, I told him about my grandfather,
Uh huh.
which he was really taken with. He told me a little bit about his upbringing and how he got into the theater and then how he got into movies. He was talking to me about how he gets into a character, lives it, puts the skin on, does it from the inside out rather than just, you know, walking through the
Mm-hmm.
motions. We went over things like that. We started to do the dialogue from the scene and we would change it up almost like we were fencing, you know, parry, thrust, touche, just to get an idea of how we both worked and responded to different things that the other one threw at the other one. And it was all done with the intention of making the scene as good as possible and becoming close for that. So that when the
Yeah.
cameras rolled, there was no camera, there was no crew. It was just him and I talking, right?
Right.
So we shot the scene. Um, the scene did not make it into the cut. I don't know if it was because of time. There was an issue that my eyes were blue, his were brown. They figured it was a surreal scene. I
Yeah.
don't know if that factored in, but there's often many times where things that you do just don't make it in for
Oh
maybe.
yeah. I
Yeah, you
spent a
know,
month shooting Blazing Saddles. I'm not in the movie. I'm in two shots. I mean, it just it happens. Yeah.
I search for you in that film constantly.
It's
You
it's
know?
it's easy. It's really really easy. There's one shot of Rock Ridge, the very
Okay,
first shot when you see the Rock Ridge, and you see this kid being drugged down the street by these big dogs. He's trying to hold on to him. That's me. And then
oh my.
when he comes up to like say welcome to the town,
Uh-huh.
where he takes himself hostage. And you got to watch it in widescreen, not
Okay.
pan scan. In
Okay.
widescreen, there's a little kid with a hat who's right next to the band, and
Okay.
that's me. That's it. That's it. But
Gotcha.
yeah, you get cut out. So you don't have you ever seen the footage or no?
No, I've never seen the footage.
Yeah.
You know, things from the 70s, it's really hard to grab them. It's
Yeah.
hard to
No,
find.
I've never been able to find it. How does this relate to Star Trek?
Well, that was my first foot in working like that. And my attitude started to change a little bit because I wanted to be the best actor that I could. I
Yeah.
started to read up on some of the books, you know, you go to Sam French and you start grabbing Strasberg and Adler and all these. I didn't. I had a hard time understanding it at such a young age, being a teenager. But working with Jodie Foster, working with Kim Richards, she was also beyond her years and
Yeah.
carried things like an adult, you know, when she was working, and working with some of the other adult actors that I worked with who I admired. I wanted to be that good and figure out what they were doing so I could make my performances as good as possible. I booked a job in 1978 for a man named David Jacobs. David Jacobs had written some
Is
children's
that
books.
Midland Heights? I know David
Yep,
Jacobs from Guns at Paradise. Yeah.
yep,
And
yeah.
he also
David.
did Dallas, I think, right?
Yep, yep. Well,
Yeah.
here's what happened. He wrote children's books, and he took his shot writing screenplays for Family and Eight is Enough, which were both Laura Marr shows because
Right.
it paid better, you know, I guess, than children's books did. And he was a very, very nice man. So he did scripts for them. And then he came up with an idea, something about an oil tycoon in Dallas, and the guy's name is JR, and the rest is history.
Yeah.
Dallas had been on for 1 year, and he came up with a beautiful show that the memories are just wonderful for me. It was called The Married Machine, and it starred Lee McCloskey and a young lady named Cindy Grover, who was one of the girls in Jaws 2. Actually, there was another girl in Jaws 2 in the series as well, who get married out of high school. Lee McCluskey was playing a 19-year-old. Cindy Grover was playing an 18-year-old. He was from a poor family. She was from a
Hmm.
rich family. And what it was like for them to get married out of high school in 1978, you know? And it was a really good,
Caplets and Montagues. It's a classic. Yeah.
yeah, it was a great show. It had good actors. I played Lee McCluskey's younger brother who had a speech impediment. I had to have a stutter in it.
Oh, cool.
And David liked it because I didn't play it like a Bugs Bunny stutter. I had a bit of a frustration with it because I couldn't get the words out the way I wanted to get out. But I was
Yeah.
also like a little artist. I made these little mechanical sculptures that moved. They were like little kinetic sculptures. Hence, at the end, I give them one, and it's the married machine. So we shot the pilot, took a month to shoot the pilot. It was a beautiful show with a beautiful score. Lee McCluskey and I became very close. He played my older brother, like I said.
Mm-hmm.
We spent a lot of time together. What a class act he was. Just a great guy. So I have wonderful memories of that. David wrote many episodes. I think there were 8. They shot 6 of them. And so the rest of 78, we shot all the rest of the series. It got very, very high ratings, but CBS canceled it for whatever reason. Maybe there was something else that they wanted to push.
They were canceling shows with 30 million viewers because
I
it just
know.
wasn't Dallas numbers.
But I came out of it with a wonderful friend who was my friend until he passed away a year ago, August. And that was David Jones, who is kind of there with me for the rest of my life, a little bit off to the wings. He was always there for advice, health issues, all kinds of things, both he and his wife, Diana. And David was heartbroken that the show got canceled. And he did something for me that nobody else has ever done. A year later, he said, well, I got another show. And he said, it's called The Secrets of Midland Heights, and I want you to have a part. I want Stephen to have a part in there. He gave me a part in a show as a gift.
That's awesome.
He just wrote me into the show. So he let me play the younger brother of another guy. And this one took place in the Midwest. And we shot, I think, 10 episodes of that before that one also was canceled. But David went on to have a wonderful career, and he was always there for me for many, many things.
He was a great guy. So my only experience with David was he did a show called Guns of Paradise, which was a Western with Lee Horsley. And I was reading for Jerome the Simple Boy, who was, either on the spectrum or, as they would say back in the day, retarded. But it was a kid who was he didn't talk a lot, and he was kind of like a special kid back in the, in the Western. It was a Western show.
Right.
And so it's the only time I've ever done this. And he was really open to it and really wonderful. I ended up doing 2 episodes where they find the boy, and then there's a fire on the second episode, and they think it's him. But basically, it's like, the slow boy of the town. And it's the only time I've ever done this where I walked in and I auditioned, but I never broke character. I walked in as the autistic young guy who couldn't vocalize. I mean, he was very interesting that a couple of different characters that both you and I played had that same type of thing where it was a very, unique situation for me because he didn't know me, I didn't know him. And so I figured, okay, well, I'll just go in as the character, and then he'll think that I'm the guy and he'll have to hire me, which happened. And then every time I went to work, I didn't bring a book. I didn't, because there was no electronics or videos or anything, but you'd bring books or you'd bring puzzles or something to keep yourself busy. I didn't do any of that. All I did was I would go to work, I'd get in my wardrobe, I'd get in my makeup, and then I'd go play in the dirt on the set. And when they were ready for me, I'd go do my scene, and then I'd go back and play in the dirt until I saw him at the rap party that year, and I was talking to him and thanking him, and he goes, "Oh, you're Patrick, you're Jerome. I had no idea because I'd never met you. I'd only seen this Jerome kid that you were playing." And so it was a really great, and he was just his crew loved him. They would do anything for him. And so I'm glad to hear that
Gosh,
that he did that for you.
David was very important in my life. And there was an episode of Midland Heights where my character can't come to terms with the death of his mother, right? I was away And
Mm-hmm.
she died while I was away. I was away on like a trip. I believe it was a scouting trip or something like that. She died. So now it's just the father, my older brother, and myself. A carnival comes to town in Midland Heights. Okay.
So many
And
carnivals in your life.
yes, it's that Fellini mask, you know? Uh, it's the grease paint. Uh,
Yep.
and there's a fortune teller. And she sees me walk by and she says, "Hey, kid, come on inside." And I look and it says, "Read your fortune, blah, blah, blah." The fortune teller sees there's something wrong with him. He's fighting an angst, and she reaches out to try and heal him, you know, using her theatricality, the crystal ball, and all of these types of things.
Yeah.
She says, "Bring me something of hers tomorrow. Bring me a handkerchief or a perfume or some of her writing or something like that." It was a beautiful script. So David comes to me and he says, these sequences, this one's all about you for this." He says, "I got Zohra Lampert to play the fortune teller."
Literally the fortune teller of all fortune tellers.
Yeah, and he said, "Be on your game, okay? She's a great actress." I was studying once in a while with Bruce Glover, was my coach at that time. And
Uh-huh.
Bruce read the script, and then he said to me, he said, "Man, you better know what you're doing or she's going to go over you with a steamroller." He said she's a very heavy method actress. She can intimidate a lot of people because she's also one who stays in character. Her very demeanor was really unique, you know. He said, "So I got to prepare you to work with her a little bit." This is before I went to the Playhouse. This is about 3 years before that.
Okay.
And I was excited. I knew who she was. She got an Emmy for an episode of Kojak that she did where she played a gypsy. And it's a
Yeah.
beautiful, beautiful performer. Everything she ever did, when you see her, she just commands the screen, you know. So I'm ready. I show up for work, and there's Zohra, and they built the inside of her tent on the soundstage. The carnival was built at Indian Dunes for the outside shots, right?
Uh-huh.
But we're going to do the stuff inside first, right? And she's sitting at her table when I walked in, and she's in costume. And she had been sitting there for like an hour. So she was in makeup, she was in costume, but
Wow.
she was sitting at her table with the crystal ball, meditating on it, trying to figure out how she was going to help me, getting used to her furniture, how she was going to handle her cards, her crystal ball, how she was going to look at me. So when I walked up, David said, "I want to introduce you. She wants me to bring you in." You know, she kind of looked up at me like this. And she said, "You're Danny." And I said, "Yes." I said, "My name is Stephen Manley." She said, "Nice to meet you. Do you mind if I call you Danny for the rest of the shoot?" I said, "Please." I knew right where she was going.
Yeah.
She was a beautiful lady. She was a very enchanting woman. And there were times where her and I would just sit across from that table for hours. And she'd just look at me like this. And she'd smile. And she'd say, "Do you want some tea? I'm going to get some tea." I said, "Yes." So I go and get tea with her, and we go back. And she said, "Shall we say our dialogue?" And sometimes she would just come out with it. And I would respond with her. And she'd look at me, and then she'd say the line again, and I would repeat it with her. And we were working this thing out. It was a wonderful experience. At the very end of it, when we were almost done, she walked over to Stella and she said, "Are you Stephen's mom?" You know, and she said, "Yes." I mean, Stella was like, "Oh my God, Zohra Lampert's coming up to me," you know. And she had wonderful things to say. She said she enjoyed working with me, etc., etc. She wrote me a beautiful letter afterwards. I no longer have
What a
that
great
letter.
experience.
And it was just a great moment, and I was grateful for David to give me that opportunity to work with that actress doing those scenes. Something else happened. I had finished my work with Zohra, and I'm supposed to have a scene outside with my dad. He pulls the car over out in the middle of nowhere. Again, we shot it at Indian Dunes.
Uh-huh.
And I'm supposed to get out of the car and walk away, and he's supposed to come up and try and comfort me and everything. Comes up. Stuff was coming up with Zohra, too. She was pulling it out of me, and I just kind of went with it. There was a makeup man there on Midland Heights. His name was Terry Smith. He was pretty famous among makeup guys. He looked like a biker. He was about 6'2", with a lot of curly hair, thin. He smoked a cigarette. He had his Gerstner box there, and you'd walk up and he'd go, "Hi, guy, what's up?" He was the first guy to teach me how to make molds. Showed me
Oh, cool.
showed me all of his blood and everything in the kit. He knew Rick Baker. He knew all those guys. So Terry and I became friends. His dad played Otis on the Andy Griffith Show.
Oh, wow.
So he went back for years. He had a history. I brought Grandpa Soli's portfolio to him, and he was fascinated with it. He knew
Yeah.
old Hollywood, and he was a younger man. He was about 32 there. So I was having a little bit of trouble with my scene, and I was standing away from the car, right? And I see a guy come walking up, and he talks to the DP, and he says, "I want to touch up Steven's makeup for a second, okay? Do I have time?" And they said, "Yeah, we're still trying to set some lights." I see Terry walk up, and he said, "You don't need any makeup. Let me tell you something." He said, "You've got it in you. Just go with it. Just let it flow." He said, "Don't push it." He said, "You've been doing a great job, okay? Look at me. Everything's fine. Think about it and just let it go. Okay?" I said, "Gotcha." And then he said, "Okay, his makeup's good." And he walked away. There were some great people I worked with, man.
That's a
And
great story because, what people may not understand is a crew and a set is like a living, breathing organism that
yes,
works together.
yeah,
We always hear about the star or a problem or a fight or an incident, but the
mhm.
day-to-day working of it is like any other place where, whatever work you have, you go in and, oh, Janice in accounting is driving me crazy, or, Phil in props is making me nuts. But you also have these interactions with people that, they support you in ways that, that's a great story to tell.
I
All right.
have.
Now, Stephen, here's what
Oh,
we're going to do.
oh,
So
I had
structure
something
wise,
to tell you.
what? I'm sorry.
I had
Please go ahead
something.
then.
I had something else to tell you, which you will
Yeah.
appreciate too, because you've got your experiences as well. And the reason that I love you and we have been friends for so long is we shared a lot of these common things. It's very unique what we did, and it was wonderful and a privilege to do the things that we all did. Yourself, Ike, Brian, Brad Savage, everybody, right?
Yeah.
Uh, when I was a younger guy, from a little guy up to about 10, 11, 12 years old, there were enough old timers still around that knew my grandfather in one way or another. They had worked with him on a set someplace. He was in Singing in the Rain. He's the guy that takes the umbrella from Gene Kelly at the end of the routine.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So I had people keeping an eye on me all the time. You hear bad things. I never encountered anything that was tabloid-ish or
Right.
someplace you don't want to go. Why? There were older guys around who would say, "Hey, don't go over there, Stephen. Come over here. We're going to show you how the lens works." Or, "Don't do this. Hey, we're going to show you how fake blood works. This is how we puppet the snake in Marcus Welby that's going to bite you." Um, there were people who cared enough. They knew about Grandpa Soli. They wanted to make sure I was cool. I also learned from them an awful lot. I learned
Yeah.
about blocking. I learned about lenses. I learned about lighting. I could see the guys sweating to death, crawling up into the rafters to hang a 4K. And later on, I had to do that, and I really had an appreciation for it. That is not easy. And
Right.
sometimes some actors or actresses who are newer, as they're older, in their early 20s may not really understand. Nobody's trying to intimidate them. They're doing their job, trying to light it, trying to
Yep.
costume it, trying to make them look as good as they can. And all of that equipment is heavy and it's hot. And it's really difficult to work with sometimes, Those guys are experts at what they do. And I learned an appreciation for that really, really early. You did too. You handled yourself on sets like a pro when you were a kid. You were already 40 years old and a veteran, And so
Hey, yeah, thanks, man.
that was one element of it. Meeting guys like Terry, who was a friend for many years.
Yeah.
He's passed away about 20 years ago. What a great thing for him to do, to come over, Oh, his makeup needs help. You don't need help with makeup. Let me help you out here. You're fine.
Right. He
Work,
knew a way in.
right. Working with Zohra, it was wonderful. And that comes up again when I go out for Star Trek.
We'll be back after these messages. Hey there, my name is Patrick Labyorteaux, and I play an actor on TV. And I also have this acting school called Working Actors School. And what we do there is we teach people to act using Zoom. So you can take an acting class with me and with a person in Connecticut, in Florida, and San Diego all at the same time, thanks to the miracle of Zoom. But we also teach kids. We have a great class called the Youth Weekly class that's every Tuesday at 5:30 p.m. Pacific time. And it's for kids. It's for like 10 to 17. And we have a great group of kids right now, and it is ongoing. So if you know someone that wants to get into acting and has never done any acting but would love to try, why don't you have them try starting off with Youth Weekly? Just go to workingactorsschool.com and check us out. It's Youth Weekly every Tuesday at 5:30 p.m. Pacific time. Act 3, present day. Okay, so here we are. We're at Star Trek. So walk us through this experience of, you'd already worked with Robert Wise on Hindenburg, and he directed Star Trek 1.
Mm-hmm.
Who's directing Star Trek 2?
Nicholas Meyer.
Okay. So there was no connection from that. So how did you get Star Trek, and what was your experience like?
This goes back to Midland Heights. There's a connection there, okay? I'll back it up. In June of 1983, I graduate high school on a Friday. Dorothy Deotis was my manager. She said, "You're going to the Beverly Hills Playhouse and you're training with Milton Katselas in the Bill Howie acting classes there, the scene study workshops." I said, "Okay, Dorothy." I went for an audition over there with Dorothy because of my experience, as your experience also would have gotten you in. I was the youngest person accepted in the adult classes in the history of the Playhouse there.
Wow.
I was also terrified. I was in there with these theater people who came from New York. They'd been to the Actors Studio, and Milton taught at the Actors Studio. And I was like, oh my God. But I took to it like a duck to water. I loved it. It was a great atmosphere. It was on a stage. I was working with wonderful people and really trying to sharpen up tools that I had just used out of instinct, except for working with Zohra, working with Tommy Lee Jones, and some people like that, who got those juices flowing. Leonard Nimoy is a theater guy, right? And he loves acting. He loves actors, actresses. He loves stage. He loves film. He loves all of it. He had seen me working with Zohra in the Midland Heights episode because Zohra was a good friend of his.
Whoa.
Okay. And because of her work ethic, the way that she works, a lot of people could be intimidated working with Zohra Lampert,
Uh-huh.
You had to be up there with her, just like Telly Savalas was in Kojak. You needed strong actors to work with her. Make scenes work, creating wonderful things.
Yeah, you got to, as an actor in a scene, you got to balance your energy levels and your abilities. Otherwise, it's just so unbalanced and it doesn't play. Yeah.
Right. So I got a call from Dorothy Deotis, and she said, they want to see you for Star Trek 3. The Search for Spock. Oh, okay. I went over to Paramount. I went to an office that was kitty corner to where your office was for See Dad Run, right?
Yep.
Okay. And I walked in. I said, Stephen Manley. The nice lady who was I believe it was Sylvia was her name. She said, oh, Mr. Nimoy's expecting you. She opened the door and I went right in his office.
Whoa.
No casting director, nothing. Okay. His office was stacked to the brim. Now, you and I collected Fangoria, Starlog, all that stuff. You know, it was that time we were starting to go to conventions and things. You and I would hang out at Movie World, Book World,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Which I remember you saying, well, this is kind of like a convention. There's books every place and they're all movies. And then we go to Bob's Big Boy.
Good times.
He had his office packed with Star Trek stuff and a lot of fan Star Trek stuff as well. He was educating himself on everything that he could delve into because it was his directorial debut and he wanted to do a good job. So I sat down and he said, Stephen, can I put you on videotape? I said, sure, of course. You and I have done that many times. And he said, we're just going to talk. Fine. So he said, you've been around a long time. I said, yes, I have. He said, boy, your credits go back a while. I said, thank you very much. He said, I see here you've done, when you were younger, you did this and that and the other. And he said, I see with Midland Heights, he said, and he looked up at me like this. He said, so you worked with Zohra for David? And I said, yes, I did. And here was the question. He said, how did you like working with her? And I said, I loved her. I loved working with her. It was an education. She brought things out of me. I could work with her and follow her. We had this beautiful rapport. She wrote me this letter afterwards and all that stuff. And he said, that's exactly what I wanted to hear, kid. You passed the test. He said, Zohra's a friend of mine. And he says, I know, how she works. And he said, I saw your scenes with her. He said, I want you to bring the same thing to this that you brought working with Zohra, but you're not going to have dialogue, Stephen. He said, I need you to do it with your body and with actions and with intent, etc. And I said, who am I playing? He said, you're playing me.
Wow. What was that feeling at that moment?
At that moment, you stay professional. He just put a heck of a card on the table.
Yeah.
And I wanted to make him proud. Yeah, I'll do it.
Were you freaking out, though, on the inside? What was the inside like?
No. I thought I'm a hired gun. He likes the way that I shoot, and I'm going to shoot for him as straight as I can. Sure, of course. Whatever you want me to do.
So I got this wrong. I was talking about 1 and 2. Search for Spock is 3, right? And
3.
that's the one that did he direct that one? Is that right?
He directed that one.
Okay. Mm-hmm. He directed that one. Okay. So Nicholas Roeg had nothing to do with it, or not Nicholas Roeg.
Meyer.
Nicholas Meyer.
So
right. So he dies in 2, right? Uh-huh. The needs of the few outweigh the needs of the many. Right. And then you are on the Genesis planet and you're discovered by Saavik, who was played by my friend Kirsty in the second one, but Robin Curtis. Robin Curtis. In Robin Curtis with you. Okay. Uh-huh. So did you do, classic Star Trek, all the planets are on stages. Did you shoot on stage or did you shoot location or?
It was shot like a classic original series Star Trek episode. The whole Genesis planet was on a soundstage. I can't remember the soundstage. It's on a call sheet someplace.
Right. Did they shoot at Paramount?
They shot at Paramount. The ship, the inside of both ships, the Klingon ship and the Enterprise, were on one stage. The Genesis planet was on another stage. The makeup stage was on another. Okay. And so they had 3 or 4 stages going for Star Trek 3.
It's a big production for them.
Yes, it was. Now at one point, Leonard Nimoy asked me to come back to the office I walked in. The fella playing Spock at 25 came in. He
Uh-huh.
had a smaller part than I did. I played the Ponfar Spock at 17,
Uh-huh.
because I had to do the Ponfar scenes with Robin. And Leonard Nimoy had told me, he said, look, we have a thing here. He says it's the Ponfar ritual. He explained it to me. He said in the TV series, we only took it up to here. He said, but I'm directing this. This is my first directorial debut. I have played Spock, for years and years and years. He said, I want to take this farther, so I want to explore that with you. He said, I'm not sure what I want to do with it yet. He said, but we'll work it out when we get there, and we'll have proper rehearsal time. I said, okay, I understand. So they
Was
brought in,
it when you're okay? So I just have questions along the way here.
yeah,
So your director
mhm,
is an actor, which has happened before. I mean, I've worked with actors that are directing, but you're actually playing the younger version of this same actor.
yes,
Was this? Did you look at that as a resource, or did you look?
yeah.
How did you connect with that? Was that a good thing, bad thing, or distraction?
First thing I started to do was look at his physicality and how he moved. That was the first thing.
Uh huh.
The next thing was his mannerisms. He's very specific with his face. Okay, so I right away I started to try and draw off of him just in his office while we were speaking. The second time I went in,
I'm sorry again. There's an actor's exercise called mirroring, where you
right?
mirror somebody. Was
Mhm.
that kind of where you were at? Where
Yes.
you just mimic what they're doing? Okay, great.
Well, I was more observing him.
Okay.
I wasn't doing that in front of him while he was videotaping me. I didn't want to break into some exercise, but I was storing up all of the footage
Okay.
of
Okay. Okay.
watching
Got
him
it. Okay.
being with me in the room and seeing if I could, draw some energy off of that I could use. He
Gotcha.
was really elegant. Boy, he had a great voice, wonderful baritone voice. Um, so I was trying to use everything that I could to help him give a good performance. He said I had the longest of the younger Spocks in this.
Uh
So
huh.
he took a lot of time with me. At one point, they brought in Joe Davis, who played him at 25, myself, and Leonard. We stood in a lineup, and he asked Harv Bennett, the producer,
Uh
Gene
huh.
Roddenberry, and Richard Arnold, who I got reacquainted with many, many years later. They came in the room. Leonard stood like this. He had Joe stand next to him. He had me on the end, and he said, what do you think? You think it'll work? And they looked and they said, oh, yeah, totally. Harv Bennett said, Steve's got blue eyes. We got to make them brown. No problem. They called Dr. Greenspoon in the valley, started making lenses for my eyes. They sent me over to Berman Studios. And again, oh, hey,
Yeah.
I'll never forget,
Berman is Berman has been the whole Berman family is a
right?
makeup dynasty that went through all the Star Treks.
I know it. I know it. And I never forget you calling me on the phone when you got summer school and said, oh my gosh, I'm going to Rick Baker's. They're going to mold my mouth. Come with me. Let's go. I remember that day. I'll never forget. Then we went to Bob's Big Boy again.
Yeah,
Yeah.
of course. We always end up at Bob's Big Boy.
That's our commissary. But they sent me over to Berman's. Because of my friend Terry Smith on Midland Heights, I was learning how to make molds and this and that and the other. So when I went to Berman's, I was like, oh my God, look at all of this wonderful stuff. I brought him a couple of pieces that I made. He knew
Oh,
what they were
cool.
he knew what they were made of by smell. He could smell the components in the pieces. They molded my ears, um, and they poured them up in plaster,
Uh-huh.
hydrostone. They had pulled Joe Davis's head, and they were going to make the Chango head out of his. So his goes to Nimoy, and then they had a second Chango head that was a younger Nimoy to his present age. So they were working on the plaster one that they pulled of Joe that day. So it was still fresh. So I watched them working on it. I
Now, this
watched
is like really geeky stuff, but was it liquid latex or foam latex at that point for you guys for the
they
ears?
they cast the pieces in foam latex. Yeah.
Okay, so foam latex,
Mhm.
you know, everyone, people who know foam latex, I'm sure my question, do you still have ears? They'll literally just disintegrate. Do you have
Yeah,
anything from
no,
the,
I kept
yeah.
them. I kept them as long as I could, but they eventually just sort of gelatinized and
Yeah.
plasticized in the bag that I kept them in. They just kind of turned
Yeah.
into jelly, you know. But I looked at his lab. He had huge ovens. I think they were pizza ovens. They had a foam room where they had
Uh-huh.
all the mixers. They had like 3 or 4 mixers, and then they had, it looked like pizza ovens to me. I might be off, but they were big. Throw the molds in the pizza oven. I sat there after I had my ears done, and I brought Tom Berman. Oh, here's my little pieces that I made, and I know Terry Smith, right? I watched Tom Berman sculpt an alien in front of my eyes,
Oh,
like
cool.
like that. And there was another woman over there, and she had a sculptor's modeling stand. She was working on another one, with these Italian tools that I had never seen before. And I was
Right.
watching Tom Berman work on a head, and he'd push the clay on there and take the texture stamp and stamp it as he was sculpting. I had never seen that before. He's all, I'll be done with this in about a half hour. It's like he just started it when I got there. That's how fast these guys moved.
So what was it like seeing yourself in full Spock ears? And
Well,
I'm so stupid. I keep interrupting my own self. So Spock has ears, but he also has the eyebrows. Do
right.
they? How do they do your eyebrows? Do they cover them, or did they shave them, or?
This is what happened. I showed up on the set the first day that I was to shoot. And the very next day, they had the fire, which knocked out some of the back lot. So I
Right.
got bumped another month. I
Ooh.
was supposed to shoot in late August. I didn't really shoot my scenes until the week of October 8th, 1983. When I first showed up, something happened. There was a mix-up with the ears. My ears didn't fit. They had gotten somebody else's ears mixed up in my bag. But when I walked in, Wes Dawn was my makeup man.
Okay.
Related to the Dawn family, they go back to the Wizard of Oz.
Wow.
So they said, "Oh, this is Wes. He's going to do your ears." And I looked at him and I said, "Wes Dawn?" And he said, "Yes." I said, "Of the Dawn family that goes back to the 30s with the Wizard of Oz?" And he's all, "Yeah, how do you know that?" I said, "I know all about your family. It's here in this book called Making a Monster. And you guys are historical. You're a historical makeup family." He was jazzed. He was also an actor. He was in the Gumball Rally. He was one of the guys
Oh, I
driving.
love that movie. Yeah.
Yeah, he was one of the guys. So Wes also was an actor. I had a ball. Show up at 5 o'clock in the morning. Robin was in her makeup chair with a coffee cup and a cigarette, and a guy named James Cale was doing her ears and her makeup.
Uh-huh.
Wes shaved my eyebrows from the arch down because he had to pencil to go up. It took
Yeah.
him it took us about 3 hours to do the ears. Now a lot of people, fans, whatnot, they will say, "Boy, that's a long time to do that." But there's a lot more to it than just sticking on an appliance. And this is the time where American Werewolf in London had just come out. The Thing
Right.
had just come out. All those magazines were going nuts with foam
You
rubber.
had Rob Bottin. You
Oh
had
yeah.
all
So
these great makeup people. It was a battle of practical makeup effects. There was
right,
no
right,
CGI.
right. So he took a long time, and he was telling me every step of the way. He's all right. So now we're going to do this. I'm going to stick it on with that, and I'm going to cut it with some acetone, and we're going to see if it's going to grab. Then okay, we're going to let it sit for 15 minutes. Let's talk about this and that and the other. And then he would say, "All right, now I'm going to attack it with the duo." "Oh, you're using duo to stipple on the edges?" "Yeah, just like in the book." "Okay, cool." Yeah, he was doing that. I had a ball. It was really, really great. And Wes and I got very close to the point where when they made a run to get makeup supplies at Friends Makeup Supply House on Laurel Canyon, Wes
Yep.
came on the set. And he says to me, "Hey, we're going to Friends. You want something from Friends? The runner's going to pick some stuff." You know? And wow. Um, When the Klingons came on, they needed more makeup men. So they transferred me to another guy. And Wes said, I've got to do the Klingons. You're going to this gentleman here. This gentleman was Michael Caine's personal makeup man.
Michael Caine.
Yes,
Holy shit.
yes. His name was Tony Lloyd. Worked with Michael Caine on every single movie he had ever done, dating back post Alfie, I think. The stories he had to tell were incredible. He also worked on Doctor Strangelove. He worked with Stanley Kubrick. He went back for years. So here I was talking to Tony Lloyd, and he taught me the trick of taking a little bit of pencil and putting it on the outer 1/4 of my eye from here to the edge.
And what
He,
does that do?
he said, that'll make your eyes pop. He said, you got really deep set eyes. He said, I do have to do the same with Michael Caine, but I use a different color. He said, for you, use this one and just go from here out. You'll see a big difference. I've been doing it ever since, doing the Tony Lloyd trick on my eye. What was nice about Star Trek, I knew several of the crew. The wardrobe man was on Little House on the Prairie, James.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yep.
There's a lot of people. Our production designer, Matt Jeffries, who designed the Little House, designed the Enterprise.
Okay.
The Jeffries tube was named after Matt Jeffries from, I mean, I could say that he's from Little House, but actually Little House guy is from Star Trek.
Yes.
But yeah, Paramount and all the different crew people. What's the best thing about being Spock? And then I'll ask you what the worst thing is. But what's the best thing about, I mean, there's only literally, I mean, there's more than just a couple, but less than 6 people have been Spock in all of the iterations.
It was important to me to give Leonard Nimoy what he was looking for and give him a good, honest interpretation. There was a 6-year-old boy who played him at 6 years old when they first find him. There was a 12-year-old boy for one shot where Robin Curtis as Savick sponges him off with a cloth because he's growing and sweating. They had to look good, but they didn't really have to do much. But by the time he's 17 years old and he's going to go through the Pon Farr, I got to bring something to the table. I just didn't want to pose and gesture and model. I wanted to give him something, and I think he expected that of me because I had worked with Zohra. So, for instance, after the Pon Farr sequence and the Klingons put us in a lineup, and they're going to kill one of us, they're talking on their communicators to Christopher Lloyd, who's up on the ship. So Leonard Nimoy did a dolly shot. He went from Merritt Butrick to Robin to me. Or it might have been from me to Robin to Merritt. I can't remember. You know, he went like this.
Right.
Did one of these types of things. And the Klingons were standing behind us. So we had already shot the Pon Farr stuff, which we rehearsed for about an hour before we shot the first shot, because he was very specific. Some of it was improvised.
Now, for those who aren't aware of in Star Trek lore, Pon Farr is like a sexual awakening type of like thing, or is that where he can't get a hold of his emotions?
It's, before you see me, Robin's character says soon he'll feel the burning of his Vulcan blood. It's Pon Farr. It happens to Vulcan males every 7 years, and he's got to be with a Vulcan woman. Do you know?
And she's a Vulcan woman.
And she's a Vulcan.
In fact, did you know that Ben Stiller loves Star Trek so much that his production company is called Red Hour, which is the part, I believe, and I'm sure we'll get comments if I'm wrong, but that it's part of the Pon Farr, that Red Hour is when kind of like when the Vulcan goes crazy.
Gotcha.
I think. Gotcha. But I could be wrong. But anyway, so please continue. Tell us, Spock. Tell us what it was like.
So the Pon Farr stuff, heavily rehearsed. Some of it was improvised on the spot. I did a couple of things, he liked that. She reacted. There you go. We filmed some other things. She touched my face, etc., etc. I always tell the fans that there's an uncut Italian Bertolucci version of Ponfar. See, uh,
Ponfar.
right, right, right. It's available in Italy. Okay, but for instance, when he did that shot, and I can feel the camera on myself, I thought, he's going to be closer to Leonard Nimoy. So just for a second, I looked at the Vulcan. I know I'm not supposed to really have my mind, but I just did Ponfar, et cetera, et cetera. It should start nailing in there his character a little bit more. So I looked at Leonard and I said, what about this? And I just went and raised the eyebrow.
Whoa, the thing that, I mean, that's, I can't do it. It's amazing that I
Right.
mean, it looks exactly like what he does.
And he was smoking a cigarette at the time, and he saw it, and he came up to me and he said, I like it. Now we're on the same page, you and I. This is working. He says it's just enough. Just enough as that camera goes by, that eyebrows up while that guy's walking. He says, leave that in. He said, you got it. I said, okay. So I mean,
Fantastic.
just little things.
So,
And
okay, so you've played Spock. Have you done any of the conventions for Spock where you're there because it's your job? Like, because you've been
yes,
in a lot of different things. Have you done any Spock things?
yes. When I was in Leonard Nimoy's office, he looked at me and he said, I got to tell you something. He said, and I'm going to ask you to do this for me. I said, yes. He said, you're playing me. He said, Star Trek has been very good to me for all my life. He said, now we're doing the feature films. He said, this is an incredible, wonderful thing. He said, you got to honor me, respect me. You can do Star Trek conventions for the rest of your life. He said, this will be a part of your resume until the day you die. He said, so just treat the fans well, take it seriously, honor it. It's not a joke because basically Stevie said, you're playing me and there's a connection there, and just treat it right for me. And I looked at him and I said, absolutely, I will do that. He said, you've been around a long time, you're professional. He said, I know we're going to work well together. He said, just do that for me. So I've done that ever since, of course. How could you not? I mean, you and
Of
I,
course.
when
No,
I,
I mean, I get your point of view, but
yeah,
what's interesting to me about the Star Trek phenomenon,
uh,
because Ike was in Star Trek, you were in Star
I
Trek. Another
know.
friend of mine did the TV show. So, and Kirsty was in it. The people who love Star Trek
Mhm.
own Star Trek in their own mind.
Oh, yeah.
Was there any interaction at one of these conventions where you were I don't know. I'm not still looking for any bad stories or good
Mhm.
stories, just like where you experienced what it was like to be Spock at one of these conventions where you're a marquee character.
I'm talking to the Red Jedi, okay? Now, you love Star Wars.
Yeah,
I love Snake Plissken, right? I
right.
I get it. You and I were aware of conventions back then, kind of before I did Star Trek. They were
Yeah.
hitting. Indiana Jones. We saw Temple of Doom together at midnight in Westwood, right?
Dressed up.
So I understand that. And Leonard Nimoy implored upon me, to take it seriously on his behalf and honor him. So I did. I did my first Star Trek convention in 2005. It took me quite a while because time passed. I went to college, art school, etc., tried my hand at different things. And I spoke with Richard Arnold. He was the talent coordinator for Creation Entertainment, who had the Star Trek license for conventions for a while. It's now moved on
Hmm.
to other people. I think it's open now for people. But he called Robin on the telephone. Now, she jumped on the convention circuit right away after the films. And she
Hmm.
said, my gosh, where have you been? People have been asking me about you for 20 years. So I did conventions, and you know something? This is important to people. And it
Yeah.
means something, just like Star Wars means something to you, just like Indiana Jones and Snake Plissken mean something to me. You know, these mean something to people, gives them hope, gives them something to fight for, to live for. There's a code of honor with it, etc., etc. I totally get it. Star Trek's got wonderful messages. Star Wars got wonderful messages as well, you know? So when I did the conventions, I'm totally open. If somebody comes up to me in a costume, the first thing I do is say, hey man, let me see your tricorder. Let me see your communicator. You look
Sweet.
awesome. It's fantastic. You know, these things are very important to these people. I have met followers of Star Trek. Their whole house is decked out like the Enterprise on the inside. You know, there's a woman who she was in one of the documentaries done by Miss Crosby. You know, she had to go to court for something. She wore a Starfleet outfit because it meant something to her, and it brought her strength when she did it. So I completely understand. One of the first people that I signed an autograph for was a young man, and he was decked out in kind of a Vulcan outfit. And he came up to, he was about 15 years old. And he said, do you realize what an important thing you've been a part of? And I always carry that with me. And I will tell you,
Mm-hmm.
Ike, I'm sure knows this as well. When you're a part of something, Little House, 70s TV, Star Trek, okay?
Yeah.
You make your mark to be a part of something that's made its mark in pop culture. That's a privilege. You know, you have to earn that. There's people who would kill for that. There's people who love these things. You know?
Well, it's really great to hear not only your connection to Leonard Nimoy and what he requested of you,
Mhm.
but to hear him understanding the importance of it and to hear your reverence for carrying that forward. So
Yeah,
thanks
it's
for that.
important.
We'll be back after these messages. Hey there, my name is Patrick Labyorteaux, and I play an actor on TV. And I also have this acting school called Working Actors School. And what we do there is we teach people to act using Zoom. So you can take an acting class with me and with a person in Connecticut, in Florida, and San Diego all at the same time, thanks to the miracle of Zoom. Now, besides classes, I also offer a one-on-one session. It's an hour just between you and me working on a particular piece of material, whether it's for an upcoming audition or maybe you're working on something and you need to have that breakthrough moment. These are really, really fun, and they're really, really great because they're really personalized and intense in all the good ways that intense can be. So if you're working on something, if you want to break through, if you want to have a one-on-one session where you're not working with other people, this is the way to do it. All the information is in the classes page on workingactorsschool.com. Act 4, questions. Okay, so we're at the questions now, and just the questions are really easy because they're all about you. You will know all the answers to this.
They're
The
not
first
multiple,
question,
they're not multiple choice.
not multiple choice. The first one is called That's SheauxBiz. And
Right.
what is your most Hollywood moment? When you think of showbiz, what would you say your most Hollywood moment is?
Very easy. David Jacobs, when we did The Married Machine, it was a new series. I think we had just shot the TV movie pilot, so we were getting ready to do the show. And it was a Laura Marr show. Laura Marr threw a party for all of their talent, DPs, directors, writers, the actors, the producers, for Eight is Enough, Walton's, Family, all of those shows. I think Dallas was there.
Uh-huh.
And I believe, I can't remember if Knots Landing was there or not. It was their first season. I think they were. They threw this party at Chasen's restaurant in Beverly Hills,
Wow.
which was it's not there anymore, but
No,
it's
it's a Bristol Farms now, but it was
is it
famous for its
really?
chili. Yeah.
Right. But Chasen's was a very, very extremely expensive restaurant to go to. So my parents and I, David said, "Hey, we're having this thing at Chasen's," and David always had his feet on the ground. He didn't really enjoy a lot of these shindig type things. He preferred family get togethers where there were kids and there were people and families were sharing and you could talk and people were down to earth. That's really where his level was. But we
Right.
went, and he would go, obviously, and his wife Diana, who's still a dear friend of mine, and they would smile and shake hands and this is fun and well, okay, yeah, but there's work to do. And I remember going to this thing, and a lot of people were having a lot of fun. Laura Marr must have dropped, I don't know how much money on this thing. They put us in like a private patio on the street side of the restaurant. But
Wow.
all I remember was, like I was telling you, Sam was like a man's man, right? Larry Hagman
Yep.
hit it off with my dad and hung out half the night with Sam. And I just remember he's in his cowboy hat, right? Larry Hagman. And from all the way across the room, he's all, "I got to ask Sam. Sam." And he made a beeline for my dad, who was like in shock. Larry Hagman was talking to him because I think they shared. I think they were both veterans of the Korean War. They had a little bit of a background that was similar for them,
Wow.
and they got along. But that was
That's
the
a
most Hollywood.
that's a pretty Hollywood moment. I mean,
Yeah,
JR is the biggest star on the planet at that
right,
point.
right.
Okay, so that's Showbiz Part 2, the
Mhm.
most embarrassing Hollywood moment.
I was thinking about that because Ike was talking about where he threw up on. I guess it was Tony Kalman,
Yeah.
right? Uh, I think that one takes the cake. I don't have an embarrassing moment. I think I was so focused and a little too serious for my own good. When I was younger, trying to do such a good job, that I don't have an embarrassing moment. I
It's
really
totally, I
don't.
mean, that's a very acceptable answer. All right,
Right.
show me the money.
Ah,
Biggest missed financial opportunity in this business. We're around a lot of different opportunities, and sometimes we miss out on something. What's your biggest missed financial opportunity?
it wasn't a financial opportunity. It was an opportunity. Um, in 1980, an Italian film director known for his art house cinema
Hmm.
saw me in one of David's programs and wanted me to be in a film with Jill Clayburgh. And he was very persistent with my agent at the time and said, "Okay, we'll give." He called me Stefan. We'll give Stefan more money, this and that. I was posed to go over to Italy. Something happened. The deal fell through, and it went to somebody else. I never knew who this was. I just found out 3 years ago it was Bernardo Bertolucci wanted me to play Jill Clayburgh's son in La Luna.
Oh no!
And
Oh man!
and I guess my agent at the time, something happened. I'm unclear on exactly what.
Oh,
Now,
when Stephen Manley tells me an Italian director, I'm thinking Bernardo Bertolucci or Argento.
right, Argento. Hey, Lee McCluskey worked for Dario Argento right after the Married Machine. So Lee got to go to Italy to work with Dario. But you know something, that would have been great to have on your resume, that you had a Bertolucci movie, and it was a
Oh
real.
yeah,
It was a controversial scene with Jill Clayburgh. I guess she was the stepmom. She has a thing with the stepson. It was in
yeah.
Italy. Not explicit, but the
No, but
theme.
it's the guy who brought us Last Tango, right? I mean, so
Yeah,
obviously
and
he
the
has a lot of history with that.
oh yeah, and the dream, and oh my God, The Conformist is an incredible film. All his work is unbelievable. Michael Pitt
Yeah,
in The Dreamers, and it would have been great to work with Jill Clayburgh, so that would have been nice. So I consider that a loss.
that's a big one. Okay, so show me. Yeah, no, you did show me Show and Tell. Now, this will be interesting. As a teenager, favorite poster in your room, and how did you come to obtain it? And
Okay.
does Drew Struzan have anything to do with it?
Well, you're right. You know, you and I used to hang out at Hollywood Book and Poster. We used
Right.
to hang out at Collector's Bookshop with Mark Willoughby, you know, who was the
Yep.
manager there, et cetera, et cetera. So you remember my room. I had Raiders of the Lost Ark, an original one sheet. I still have it. I still have my original Jaws, uh, which
Oh, wow.
which I actually got from Mark, you know. What else? I have a Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange. And then, if you remember, I have a French 3 sheet of Frank Langella's Dracula.
Yeah,
Now,
I do. That was huge. It took over one whole
whoa,
wall.
now you had just gotten your posters framed. And so
Yep.
that gave me inspiration. And you said, I remember you said, you got to get some of your posters framed. So got the big Dracula framed. Now you came over. We spent the day together, and it was a long drive back for you. So you said, I think I'm going to spend the night with you. Fine, great. So you crashed. I crashed. The poster was in a wood frame. And in the middle of the night, we both heard crack as the poster was so heavy, the frame broke, and you moved like lightning. Boom, you got up and held this thing up against the wall, and I was right behind you. And I remember that we both took it off the wall and we set it aside. But I just remember
I
like,
also remember, didn't you have some Monty Python poster or,
yeah,
yeah,
the Holy Grail, Monty
the
Python and
Holy
the
Grail? That was it. Yeah.
and I
Knights Who
also
Go
have,
Knee.
yeah, I also have, and now for something completely different. I haven't collected movie posters in a while until recently. I have a couple of Euro films that I love that used to play at the Rialto Theater all the time. You and I would go to
Right.
the Rialto to see them.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, we saw the Magic Christian together. You know, I
Right.
remember that. Yeah,
Good times. Good times. And we'd end up at Bob's Big Boy.
that's right.
And then Showdown. Best thing you ever did? Worst thing you ever did?
You mean as far as
Acting.
as a role?
Yeah, just as an actor. Like, what
That's
would you say your
hard.
best? It is hard, but it's a question you have to answer, Stephen.
You know, it's Star Trek is a landmark, right? And it's a
Yeah, I mean, that's a great answer.
and it's a privilege to be in that. It's people always, even with my older credits dating back to 70, you'd have people always bring up Star Trek because that's the big one, right?
Of course.
There's been other things in there. Got to be in a thing for Kevin Costner about Billy the Kid. I got gunfight and shot to death. I got to ride a horse and do all that kind of stuff. Working with Zohra was wonderful. That led to Star Trek. So those are both kind of right in
So,
there.
what would you say your worst performance? The one that when it comes on or when you think about it, you go, "Oh, I could have done so much better."
You always think you can do better when you watch your stuff. You look at it and you start to pick it apart, right?
Absolutely.
Um, there was a horror movie called Ghost Hunters. It was made for Asylum, but it was a straight horror film. The young man who directed it, Perry Teo, he said they were begging him to make a movie for them. And he said, I'm not going to make a comedy. I'm going to make a straight horror film. I want it to feel like an old 60s Hammer film, but new. And we
Uh-huh.
shot in this great location. I was the bad guy in it at the very end. But there were some pieces of that I felt were awkward. Awkward.
Hey, look,
You know
some of
why?
my worst work has been at the asylum.
Because you know why? And it's just, you know, it's happenstance. It's just culturally ingrained. Whenever you get a guy with the weapon at the end of the movie, and he's in a big cavernous space, and he's been hurt in the leg, and he has to limp, it becomes Jack Torrance. That's just what it does. No, and I fought against that. I didn't do that. I didn't want to do an imitation of anybody. But pop culture, anytime you see that, that starts to happen. So I wish some of that had been shot differently and they had used some different takes of stuff. But it's
okay.
not.
Well answered for both sides. And then finally, show me some love. What's your favorite performance of mine? All about me.
I've listen. I've watched you since 1972. Okay, I've seen everything you've done. I've loved Summer School. I love Heathers. But Sam called me on the phone, and he was watching JAG, and he said, "Oh my God, Patrick was fighting the Taliban and he got his leg blown off. I'm so proud of him. He took so many of them out and he got wounded really valiantly." And so I went and I watched that. I mean, he was going nuts over it. And so I went and I watched the episode and I was like, "Oh man, that's my buddy. There's Patrick." And the shot rises up and you're laying there with your legs missing, and I just thought, "Oh yeah, man." There's something about we cherish our history as child actors, right?
Yeah.
But when you can grow up and go into adulthood and play adult roles, fire a gun, ride a horse, take out the Taliban, do whatever it is, it's very healing for you. You're not stuck as a kid actor anymore. Now you've made the transition, So I was very proud of you.
That thought of making the transition from kid actor to adult could not be a better place to end this conversation. Although, as anyone can tell, we can talk for another 4 hours still have stories to go. Stephen Manley, thank you so much for joining us on the Patrick Labyorteaux Show with Patrick Labyorteaux. You have been an awesome guest. You've always been a great friend, and we got to have you back. And just thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. You and I, our history goes back so far. You're cherished in here. Best, dearest friend. You understand what I've gone through. I understand what you've gone through. It was wonderful to see Ike. As child actors back then, we were a part of a very unique period of time, and we were part of a very unique privilege to do what we did. And everybody came to the table. Nobody was spoiled. Nobody was demanding. Everybody was very, very professional. And I have great memories of working with everybody, being around with everybody. And you, I'm very proud of you. Always will be. And you and I will keep doing this until the day we die, just like you told us.
That's the beautiful part of this job. They always want older people to play older people. So Here you go. All right, man. Thank you so much. I love you so much, Stephen. Best friend.
Too, Patrick.
And we will catch up later, okay?
All right. Thank you so much.
It's the Patrick Labyorteaux Show. Patrick Labyorteaux. He's the one you gotta know.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening. I'm really, really glad you're here and checking out the podcast. It is an audio podcast wherever you get your podcasts. It's a video podcast over on YouTube or on Spotify or wherever you get the video ones. All of my socials are Working Actors School on TikTok, on Instagram, and on YouTube. Please check us out. If you want any information about the school, it is at workingactorsschool.com. We've got classes going on all the time. And again, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.